All right, welcome to week 5. Well, I hope everybody's enjoying the course and you're learning a lot. This week we're going to talk about overtime, which may seem pretty simple, but of course in California it's fairly complicated. We're not going to go over every single overtime rule in California, but we'll talk about the most important ones or the ones that are more common and go through the different rules. So let's dive right in. So generally speaking, federal overtime law is pretty simple. Someone gets paid time and a half for any hours they work in excess of 40 hours in a week. They don't have double time, it's just time and a half for any hours that they work over 40 hours in a week. That's federal law. California law breaks it down into regular overtime and double overtime. So they get regular overtime or paid at time and a half whenever they work more than 8 hours in a day, 40 hours in a week, and if they work 7 days in a row in a work week, the first 8 hours of that 7th day. We call that a 7th day premium. And then double time, they get paid double overtime when they work more than 12 hours in a single work day, or they work more than 8 hours on the 7th consecutive day working. So if they work 7 days in a work week, any hours that they work over 8, they will get paid double overtime. So because California has daily overtime and weekly overtime, we're going to talk about how to calculate the right amount of overtime without double counting. We call that pyramiding. And basically, the best way to do it is you take the greater of daily versus weekly overtime. So in this example, somebody works 10-hour days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, as well as a 6-hour shift and an 8-hour shift. When you total that up, it's 44 hours. So they have 4 hours of weekly overtime. But when you look at the daily overtime, you have 6 hours of daily overtime because they have 2 hours on Monday, 2 hours Tuesday, and 2 hours on Wednesday. So you take the greater of, and that would be 6 hours of overtime. Now, if somebody ever works double overtime, let's say somebody worked 13 hours in one particular day, you would automatically make sure that they get 1 hour of double overtime for that particular week. And then you would go and do the same analysis with the rest of the time that they worked for that week. So what's interesting though is overtime is calculated based on a work day. And normally the work day is from midnight to midnight, but you can have different work days, and you want to have a different work day if you have employees that consistently work a midnight shift. So if their shift starts in the evening and ends in the morning, you're going to want to adjust their work day. Otherwise, you're going to have working 4 or 6 hours one day and then 4 or 6 hours the next day, and it won't look like it's one shift, but when in reality it really is one shift. So you can have different work days. You just need to define that in writing to the employees. And you have to be consistent within the group. So you can classify, okay, all these employees that work in this group, here's the work day. And all the employees that work in that group, here's the work day. So you can define different work days within the company. Usually you don't have to worry about this unless you have employees that are working a midnight shift that goes from one day to the next. Similarly, you can define what the work week is. Naturally, it's going to start Sunday and go through the end of the day Saturday. But you can change the definition of what the work week is. And this is important when we're talking about the 7th day premium, because if they work 7 days in a work week, that 7th day, every hour up to 8 hours is considered overtime, and every hour worked over 8 hours on that 7th day is paid at double overtime. So if you have somebody that has a work week that's Sunday to Saturday, and the employee works Wednesday of one week through Tuesday of the next week, even though that's 7 days in a row, it's not 7 consecutive days in the work week. Therefore, they're not going to get that 7th day premium. If you take that same example in the work week with Sunday through Saturday, and they worked Sunday through Saturday, meaning 7 days in a row in the work week, then you would pay overtime on that 7th day for every hour worked up to 8 hours, and then after 8 hours you pay double overtime. I know that can be confusing. It's just important to set it out at the beginning what the work day and what the work week is going to be. Usually if you have employees that are paid according to some sort of commission agreement, I will always include that in the commission agreement. I will define what the work day and the work week is, so there's no ambiguity or question about what the work day and the work week is. Here's another example. Somebody works midnight, and the work week is midnight on Monday all the way to midnight on Sunday, so Monday through Sunday, and the employee works 6 hours per day, Monday through Sunday. They're going to have 6 hours of overtime because they work 7 days in a row, and on the 7th day they worked 6 hours. But if you had that same schedule, but the work week was midnight on Sunday through Saturday, and they worked Monday through Sunday, that's 7 days in a row, there's not going to be any overtime due because the 7th day that they worked in a row spills over into the next work week. The work week starts on a Sunday. So even though they worked 7 consecutive days, they did not work 7 consecutive days within the work week. And so that's why the work week definition can be important. Okay, so let's talk about the regular rate. This is probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today. You're definitely going to have a quiz question asking you to calculate the regular rate. And it's usually not too difficult, but let's talk about it to make sure you understand the parameters. Simply put, regular rate is what you use to calculate overtime. Regular rate is calculated by taking all earnings for a particular week or pay period and dividing it by the total number of hours worked. So when I say total earnings, you have to include their hourly pay, their salary, their bonuses, their commissions, piece rates. But here's a list of things you don't include. Any kind of gifts, a discretionary bonus like a Christmas bonus, any pay for hours not worked. So if they get holiday pay for not working, or vacation or PTO, that would not go towards the regular rate calculation. Expense reimbursements, profit sharing, those types of things would not be included in the regular rate calculation. You also don't include overtime premiums that we're talking about calculating right now, and you don't put any kind of split shift premiums, reporting time pay, missed meal periods or rest periods. All those things would not be included in the regular rate calculation. So what's interesting though, when you're calculating the regular rate for a salaried employee in California, it's a little bit different than the federal law. So for salaried, you just divide their total salary by 40 hours. And let's say when you divide their total salary by 40 hours for a particular week, if it's a weekly salary, and you come out with an effective rate of $15 an hour, then you need to pay that for each overtime hour worked on top of the salary. So you'll have a salary of whatever it is, and then you'd have additional supplemental pay that would pay them for each overtime hour worked. So you cannot use salary to compensate somebody that is not exempt, and we're going to talk about the exemptions here in a minute. You can't use the salary to compensate them for the overtime hours worked. So you need to pay extra pay on top of it for non-exempt employees. And then when you have somebody that's earning piece rate, bonus, commissions, whatever, on top of the salary, you multiply the regular rate in half, you times it by 0.5, and then you times it by the number of overtime hours worked. And the reason why you times it by 0.5 is that you can spread out the bonuses, commissions, piece rate, whatever, over the regular and the overtime hours worked. So you already paid them time, and then you need to pay an overtime premium, so you need to pay them half, so that they earn time and a half for all of the overtime hours worked. And I know that can be confusing. Your textbook has a couple examples that go through regular rate dealing with hourly, salary, and commission employees, and it's important to read through those and understand the differences, because I will tell you right now that this is a very common, or an area where it's very common for people to make mistakes. And when I work with employees and I work with HR professionals, it's sometimes very difficult to understand regular rate and how to calculate the proper regular rate. So make sure you have a good understanding of that. Look at the examples in the book and do expect to have an example or two in the quiz talking about how to calculate the regular rate. So in California, you can't have a fluctuating work week. You can't also have what's called bellow contracts, which is basically saying, well, we think you're going to work 45 hours, so we're going to pay you 40 regular, 5 hours of overtime. And in California, you can't do that. You just need to pay them the actual overtime hours worked. And then when you have somebody that's working and they have multiple hourly rates throughout a pay period, you can do what's called a weighted average or blended average, where you take the rate times the total hours worked, and you take the total, and then you do that for each different hourly rate. You add those together so that you have a total pay for the pay period, and divide it by the total hours worked for the pay period, and that will give you a blended regular rate based on the multiple hourly rates during the pay period. And then you can pay overtime at half, so that regular rate times 0.5 times the total number of overtime hours worked, and that will give you the overtime premium that is owed for that particular pay period. So just to be clear though, when you pay, if somebody, let's say somebody works and makes $15 an hour, if they work and they don't receive any kind of commissions or bonuses, they just get paid hourly, and you pay them overtime for overtime hours worked, you're just going to call that overtime pay. Regular overtime or double overtime is what most people call it. But if you have somebody that's earning commissions or bonuses, or they're earning multiple different hourly rates during the pay period, and you already paid them the base, and all you're going to pay is the half, so that they earn time and a half for their overtime hours worked, then what you call the half, you call that a premium, overtime premium. So somebody could earn a whole bunch in commissions, be paid primarily or solely by commissions, and then you'd pay an overtime premium, which is the regular rate times 0.5 times the total hours worked for the pay period. If you have any questions about that and it still doesn't make sense, please send me an email. We can discuss it further. So you must pay the overtime on commissions paid to non-exempt employees. Sometimes employers will pay someone $15 an hour and they'll give them a commission, and they'll only pay overtime on the hourly rate. They'll pay him $22.50 for each overtime hour worked, and they won't pay him overtime or an overtime premium for any commissions or bonuses earned. This is not acceptable. This is a violation of the law. So you have to take the total commissions divided by the total hours worked, and that'll give you the regular rate for the commissions. Then, once again, you only need to pay an overtime premium, so you take the regular rate and times it by 0.5, and then you times it by the total number of overtime hours worked, and that will give you, I call that a commission overtime premium. And you have to do that for commissions or bonuses. You can put them together and call it commission bonus overtime premium, whatever you want to call it, but you have to pay the overtime on the commissions and the bonuses. So let's talk about overtime in general. It can be mandatory. You can require employees to work a reasonable amount of overtime, especially if it's a busy season. Obviously, it's best to give them advance notice and let them know that you're going to need them to work overtime. But most wage orders prohibit requiring employees to work more than 72 hours in a work week. So that's on the other end of the spectrum, having them work an excessive amount of time. But employees can do so voluntarily if they so choose. So on the flip side of that, sometimes you have employees that work overtime and you don't want them to work overtime, because then you have to pay a penalty or premium. You have to pay them overtime pay. So if an employee nevertheless works overtime, even though you didn't authorize it, the best thing to do is to still pay them for it, and then you can discipline them for working the overtime. Tell them that overtime, you must receive pre-authorization before working overtime. If you do it again, you'll get written up, and then if they do it again, you write them up, and progressive discipline such. And I've even had employers terminate employees because they keep working overtime without permission. California doesn't allow comp time. That's where you work late one day and then leave early the next day. You can't do that in California because of the daily overtime laws. You can do makeup time, though, which is pretty rare and probably could be used more than it is. But if an employee requests it, it has to be the employee. It can't be by the encouragement or the request of the employer. But if you have an employee that says, hey, something's come up, I gotta go to the doctor, I gotta have surgery, whatever, and I'm gonna miss 4 hours today, can I make it up on such and such date? You can do that, but it must be made up in the same work week. The employee can't work more than 11 hours in a day or 40 hours in the work week to make it up, and the employee must present a signed written request for each occasion to do the makeup time. And it's a very limited exception. It's very different than federal law, but it is possible to do makeup time in California. All right, let's talk real quick about domestic workers. These are in the wage orders 5 and I think 14. Personal attendants is an employee that's employed by a private household to work in the household to supervise, feed, dress a child, elderly, or disabled person. So you have somebody that lives in your home to take care of your kids or take care of an elderly person or a disabled person. They can't spend more than 20% of their time on household duties, such as cooking and cleaning. And if they meet these requirements, they must be paid overtime for more than 9 hours per day or 45 hours in a week. So the rules are slightly modified for those personal attendants that work in the home. And then for domestic workers, if somebody lives in, you must not require them to work more than 5 consecutive days without a 24-hour break unless it's an emergency. They have to be paid overtime for up to 9 hours on the 6th and 7th day, and double overtime for working more than 9 hours on the 6th and 7th day. If they don't live in the residence, then they're subject to the regular overtime rules. Now, I don't think that applies to most of you in your professions or for the companies that you work with, but keep that in mind in case it comes up. All right, so alternative work weeks are another great thing. They're very difficult to implement, but once they are in place, they are very beneficial to employers and employees. Employees actually, quite honestly, love them quite a bit because you can work a 4-day week or a 3-day week and just work a longer day during the week. So employees may work up to 10 hours per day without being paid overtime, so long as they do not work longer than 40 hours per week. So with an alternative work week arrangement, the most common form is 4-10s. They work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they work 10 hours a day each of those days. So they work 40 hours during the week, but they don't get paid overtime. That is their 40-hour week. And if you follow the rules, then you can have an alternative work week and not have to pay employees overtime. On the flip side, employees like it because then they don't have to work as many days. Another very common one is called 980s. Where they get 1 day off every 2 weeks. And the way that this works is you set it up so that the work week starts on Friday at noon. So even though you're working 8 hours on a Friday, 4 of those hours go to the previous work week, and then 4 hours go to the coming work week. It's the start of the new work week. So that's why you can get away with working 36 hours, 4 9-hour days, and then just 1 8-hour day every other week, because that 8-hour day gets split between the previous week and the coming week, and that's how you get a 40-hour work week. 980 is also very common because then you basically get every other Friday off or every other Monday off. So in order to implement an alternative work week, there's a lot of hoops that you have to go through. Most employers that want to go through it, they call me up. We go through the different steps that need to be done, and then I draft the documents for them because you have to have ballots, you have to have notices, you have to have meetings with the employees, you have to do a vote, and then when you vote, you have to send it to the state for them to record it. So there's a lot that needs to be done because you're trying to basically skirt around the overtime laws. They make it very difficult for you to do that. And if you don't do it, the consequences are very severe. So it's important that you do it and that you are registered in having an alternative work week. There's a website under the Department of Industrial Relations where you can look and see if a company has a registered alternative work week. And if you don't, plaintiff's lawyers can go after you. So it's really important to do it right and have it registered. So To implement an alternative work week, first step is that you have to determine who you want it to apply to, a particular department, a particular shift, a certain job classification, a certain location like this warehouse but not that warehouse. It can really be just one employee, but usually it's not. And it does not include exempt employees. So you have to propose the alternative work week to the workforce. You can have a certain schedule, or you can have a menu of options. Remember, you can't make them work more than 12 hours per day. Anytime they work over 10 hours, you have to pay them overtime in the alternative work week arrangement. Unless they're in the healthcare industry, then you can go up to 12 hours before having to pay overtime. So that's why you hear a lot of times about like nurses who work 12 hours a day, 3 days a week, and they work 36 hours, and that's it. So after you structure that and propose the work week, you have to distribute a written disclosure to the employees of the alternative work week. If you have at least 5% of the employees who speak a different language or a language other than English, you must have it translated into that other language. So you have to give them a written disclosure, and then you have to hold a meeting. And you have to do the meeting at least 14 days before you have the vote, before you have the election. And then you have to have a secret ballot election where people place votes without putting who they are, so they can't be retaliated against. And they vote whether they want to implement the alternative work week or not. And as an HR professional, guess who's the person administering all this? You are. So you have to propose the schedule, you have to do the written notice, and then you have to have the meeting to talk about it, make sure you can answer any questions the employees may have. And then after that, you do the secret ballot elections. So after you have the elections, you have to file the results with the Department of Industrial Relations. They have a special office that tracks alternative work weeks. If somebody can't work the alternative schedule, you must do something to reasonably accommodate them. And then let me go back. You have to have a 2/3 vote of the affected employees to pass. So if you don't have enough employees approve the alternative work week, you can't do it. It has to be mutual. The company has to want to do it, and 2/3 of the workforce has to want to do it. So if you have a alternative work week in place and you want to get rid of it, the company can unilaterally revoke the alternative work week. But you have to give advance notice because of daycare or ride sharing and those types of things. You have to give them advance notice so they can adjust their schedules to go back to the regular work week schedule. Similarly, employees, if they want to get rid of the work week, they could sign a petition. If they get 1/3 of the affected employees to sign a petition, then the employees themselves can unwind the work week. That's pretty rare. It doesn't happen. I've never actually heard of it happening before, but it's possible in a union workforce. And then if you want to implement subsequently an alternative week after that, you have to go through the same process and get that 2/3 vote to implement the work week. Okay, let's take a break and we'll come back and finish week 5.